What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Cinemacast, our movie review podcast on YouTube, TikTok, Twitch, and such. If you guys enjoy our episodes of this podcast and other content that we have to bring on here, please leave a like, follow, subscribe, and follow us on social media. And if you're on Discord, come join us on our Discord server for updates and much, much more. Everything is down below. So, today's feature is titled The Shed. Now you're probably thinking, God, is this going to be one of those fucking B movies that are dumb as shit, like the movie Rubber, who it's about a killer tire, or killer sofa, or Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, or Jack Frost, or Killer Donuts? No, it's not like that. Although those films, some of those films I did see, and they are ridiculously funny and stupid, but they are of a somewhat horror genre. They are, but they are ridiculous. And yes, there is somebody out there that continues to make movies like that for whatever reason. But no, this movie here is a completely different it's a completely different engine. It's a completely different model, and it's a completely different movie. Trying to think of the right words for it. This one, they say, is from the executive producer of the Saw franchise. Now, should that really say a lot right there? From the executive producer of the Saw franchise. Now, the Saw franchise, there's a bunch of great movies. They're good. Like, the first couple movies was really good, or maybe the first three. Saw X, which was a prequel, sequel, / which took place in between, I think, Saw 2 and 3, or Saw 1 and 2. I can't remember which. But they were great movies. But then after a while, they started becoming more of like a horror porn kind of thing, where it's like, you don't even watch those movies for the story. You just watch to see how people get killed in these newly effective traps, and how gory it is, and how bad it is. But all the stories tend to connect in some way, and as you watch each movie and you're trying to piece each movie together with each other, it's a big convoluted mess because there's so many people involved in it and shit. Like, think of it as kind of like the very silent John Wick of the genre, where it's like you got everybody who's involved with each other, and they do certain things to all these other people, but they have a reason to do it, that kind of thing. But before I get into The Shed, anybody listening now, are you a fan of vampire horror films? Vampire horror. I'm not talking about that wimpy Twilight movie, which is based off the teenage novel Twilight. I'm talking about actual vampires. Vampires that, cannot stand being out in the sun. Vampires that can be killed off by sunlight, garlic, stake in the heart, whatever, that kind of shit. Vampires that show their true nature. And there's a ton of vampire movies that are out there. The vampire genre has been around for actually over 100 years. Isn't that something? Like, novels and books for that genre were written in the 1800s, early 1900s, but I think the very first vampire movie, which was Nosferatu, I want to say it came out as early as, well, yes, okay. So that is 1979. I am so sorry. So if we type in Nosferatu here. Okay, Symphony of Horror. Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror. That movie came out in 1922. Nosferatu is over 100 years old. Now, even though Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, she wrote that, I think, in the 1800s or so. I can't remember which. Frankenstein, the first Frankenstein movie came out in the 1930s. But when it comes to the cinema, the vampire is the oldest creature to be on screen in the cinema, which is pretty amazing. Like, we're coming up on, like, I think we're actually on the 85th anniversary for A Wizard of Oz, and people look at that as like, oh my god, The Wizard of Oz, 85 years old. Yes, Wizard of Oz came out in 1939. 1939. That almost 100 years right there. But the oldest known film that people can still watch today or find anywhere, I think, is Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror, starring Max Schreck as the titular role. That's the oldest living vampire movie right there. Vampires have been around for over 100 years. And we've had countless, and I mean countless tales, countless retellings, countless movies, countless books about vampires. There's just something about vampires that is just so eerie and mysterious. It's almost like a second identity when it comes to vampires. You know, anybody could be a vampire. And even the lore behind the movies, like sometimes the lore is like, if you kill the head vampire, any of the other people that are affected by it return back to normal. You know, they're no longer vampires. But that's in cinemas, you know. But then today's standards, you know, people of the gothic and the emo, what do you call it? I don't want to say the era, but, you know, people who are like, you know, of that shit, of that nature. There we go. The gothic and emo nature. Anybody of that nature. You know, they follow like dark and conspicuous shit, you know? Like, darkness is depression. This sadness is depression. This is what, you know, it's all dark and, you know, the fake blood, fake black tears and shit from the mascara and all that kind of stuff that goths and emos dress up as and shit, you know. But then you got some out there that take it a little too literal. Like, there are people out there that take it literal and they'll mutilate their body to look like a vampire. Like, they'll have the fangs implemented in their fucking gums and shit to have vampire fangs. Like, it's like a very popular pulp culture kind of thing when it comes to vampires. And then you got a lot of terrific vampire movies. You got a lot of horrible vampire movies. I've seen a handful of them. You know, like 30 Days a Night with Josh Hartnett, or maybe The Lost Boys with Keith Sutherland, you know, and the Haim and the Corey boys, Corey Haim and Corey Feldman. I've seen a lot of vampire movies, and I can't list them off the top of my head. Same thing with the werewolf movies. Frankenstein, I only seen maybe like 4 or 5 of those, you know, like, you know, the creature features, they never get old. They never get old, but they do get reinvented in some way. They do get reinvented in some way, and that is the nature of today's episode of The Shed. Now, there's not going to be any kind of spoilers to this because well, first off, from what I'm reading off of, there's really nothing much of a plot synopsis to the movie. And second, how I came across this movie, I seen a scene from the movie. I watched a scene from the movie on Facebook. You know, because usually when you're scrolling on social media like Facebook and you go through the video shorts on there and shit, you don't really go on Facebook to read somebody's post of, my mom died today, rest in peace. No, you don't really scroll through stuff like that. You just watch the videos. Just admit it. We all fucking do it. And I came across this movie scene from the movie where this teen boy, you know, he's outside with his dog, and there's something living in the shed, and his dog's barking at it and really growling at it, and he don't know what the fuck it is, you know, that kind of thing. But he lets the dog loose, and the dog goes into the shed, and sadly, you know, the dog does die in the film, you know, like, they do say, like, you know, animals are not harmed in movies and stuff like that, you know, but, you know, you hear what's going on with the dog, and then the dog's head comes flying out of the fucking out of the shed and into the field, right? You know, that kind of thing. So, you know, something is living in the shed. But I'm like, at first when I saw it, I'm like, is this like, are they saying like the shed's alive? Like maybe the shed is one big creature or some shit? Like, I don't know. I really don't know. But it was an interesting take, and then his I think it was his grandfather or his uncle that he's living with. I think it was his grandfather. His grandfather is kind of abusive toward him, so he comes, you know, he goes in and gets his grandfather, you know, and he's like, "What happened to the dog? What happened to the dog? I'm gonna beat you or some shit." I forgot what it was, you know. And then the grandfather's going out to the shed, but then the scene cuts off, right? And I'm like, usually when I see a fresh movie scene on Facebook or something that really catch my interest, I got to go check it out, you know. And usually I go in the comment section. I'm like, okay, what movie is this? What movie is this? And somebody will always post the title of the film, so I look it up, you know. Now, I did not watch the first 20-some minutes of this film, so I don't know a whole lot of the backdrop with it. All I know is like I started at that scene and I worked my way up to the end of it. So I'm like, okay, so the basic synopsis is there's these two friends, Stan and Dahmer, or Dahmer, I think it was Dahmer, yeah. And they have dealt with bullies their whole lives. And you see that in the film. They're high schoolers, you know, they continue being pounded on by bullies and shit. But when Stan discovers that there is a murderous vampire taking shelter in his shed, he knows he has to find a way to destroy it, but Dahmer has a more sinister plan for the vampire. We'll get into that in a little bit. So yeah, I watched it from that scene on up. So all I know is there's a love interest to the character Stan. You see her, you know there's something going on with her, and then you meet these high schoolers that bully these two boys constantly. You know, they're always beating them up and shit like that. And then you got the abusive grandfather Stan lives with, and he hates taking his shit all the time, you know, but you know he doesn't want to lose him because he's living with his grandfather, you know. But there's even some like unanswered shit, you know, that if you're watching a movie like this and you're like, wait a minute, there's some unanswered questions here as to like, grandfather died, how's he still living in the house or some shit like that, you know, that kind of thing. But yes, this is a vampire movie. It's a American vampire horror film, and it's directed by Frank Sabatella, I guess that's how you pronounce his name, Sabatella. He also wrote the screenplay on it. This is based on a story by Jason Rice. The film stars J.J. Warren, Cody Castro, Sophia Happening. I don't fucking know. I can't pronounce half the names. This was debuted at the Sitges Film Festival in October of 2019. That's when this film was released. So this film is 5 years old. Actually, this movie premiered at the film festival October 5th. And as I'm recording this video, which is October 6th, I'm sorry. But this movie was released in the U.S. November 15th, 2019. So this movie's 5 years old. So, yes, this is a unique vampire movie. And it's unique for a reason or two. So you got these two high schoolers, you know, they're dealing with tropes of their own. They're getting pounded by bullies in high school. You got the one who's got a crush, you know, he's in love with this girl, and then he's got an abusive grandfather and stuff. But then something happens in this boy's shed, you know, his grandfather's shed. He don't know what's living in this shed. In fact, spoiler, going back to that scene I was talking about, the grandfather goes in there and the grandfather ends up dead too. So the boy locks the shed, locks him in there. But then, of course, you know, he reveals, or it's revealed to his friend Dahmer, that he has a vampire that is living in his shed, and he tells him not to tell anybody, not to let it out. But what does Dahmer do? Dahmer has other plans for this vampire as well. So he figures, we can kill the bullies. We can take the bullies out or use it to scare the bullies, you know, that kind of thing. But in the end, it kind of turns into, I want to say, now this is me thinking it, this is my opinion of it, this is turning into like if it was like a Stephen King version of The Lost Boys. Now, The Lost Boys was a unique classic. You know, it was about a group of teenagers who disappeared, but they're all vampires. And they all hang out in a certain place out there in California. The town has, you know, the town has a lot of mysterious deaths and disappearances going on. You know, you see bulletins of kids and people disappearing. Their pictures are up all over town. Nobody knows what the hell's going on. But it's like, hey, you got the vampires that are in secret captivity, and they're out hunting people at night, but they're also having fun at night too. So that was like the go-to horror movie of the late 80s into the 90s and such, and it still holds up today. It's still a great classic, you know, to watch. But with this movie here, it's almost like, I want to say the shed is like a dulled down version of a Stephen King take on The Lost Boys, because there are some elements in there, like toward the end, there's a couple elements in there that feel like it's been kind of borrowed away from The Lost Boys in a sense, because there is a big showdown in the end between Stan, his girlfriend, and the main vampire that lives in the shed. Turns out to be somebody that, I don't know, who ended up disappearing, who was a serial killer, and he just disappeared, and he was living in his grandfather's shed, and it turned out he was a vampire. So, there's just so much going on with this movie, and there's a lot of detail that I can't really remember off the top of my head that I can actually explain to you. But this is a movie that I did find online, and I did watch it, and I think this was distributed by RLJE Films. I don't think I've heard of it. Yeah, RLJ Entertainment. Apparently, okay, Image Entertainment. They were formerly Image Entertainment from 1981 to 2012, and this is just a subsidiary. So this company has pretty much been around for 43 years. Well, that's news to me. What movies did they release here? It looks like a bunch of dumbass movies, I see. Oh, God, I don't even know the name. Let's see, The Tall Man. I recognize The Tall Man. That had Jessica Biel. I still ain't watched that yet. I'm just, it looks like a lot of stinkers, but there's some horror. There's a horror film, Wolf Creek 2. I haven't watched that yet, but that's the sequel to Cabin Fever, Patient Zero. What the fuck, The Cobbler? Oh, that's that Adam Sandler movie. I ain't watched that. I really. A Christmas Horror Story. Okay. So, let's see. Is there any... Okay, did I see this one? No, I did not see that one. So, there's a lot of movies from this production studio. Some of them I heard of, and then there's some that there's maybe one or two I may have missed that I probably seen. I don't know, but yeah, that's how well known this company is. RLJ Entertainment. Yeah, I haven't seen too many. Well, the only one I've seen so far was The Shed. Then, so this movie, upon release, it holds a 62% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. If you guys ever care about that. Leslie from The Guardian said that the film was an efficient enough machine for generating scares. I don't want to say generating scares, but it's a vampire movie. If you've seen a lot of vampire movies in your life, you know what you're getting into. Typical vampire movie. Like, to anybody who's a horror fan and a fan of vampires or seen vampire movies, you're not going to get typically scared, because who gets scared really at a vampire movie nowadays, Unless you got the right production team, not just the right director, but the right production team. If you got the right engineering team and all, if you got the right story, if you got a good enough story to make a good enough vampire movie and try to make it terrifying, then I'll come back and say, okay, that was really terrifying. But something like this, it may have just very light thrills on it, and that's just for me. I'm just sitting there watching it, like, it's okay. It's a vampire movie. It really is. There's really nothing too terrifying about it. I mean, maybe the saddest thing in the movie for anybody is the death of a fucking dog. Is the death of the dog in the movie. That's about it. Other than that, this movie has really nothing new to provide in the nature of being a pretty well made vampire movie in a sense. It's just your atypical vampire movie. That's all it is. For Slash Film, Raphael Motomayor called the film a dark and poignant look at bullying and how easy it is to fall into a dark path of revenge while also being a traditional horror movie. Now, the tradition is it's a vampire movie. That's what makes it tradition. It's a vampire movie, but you put the element of a vampire genre into a movie where you got teenagers that are being bullied constantly, and that's a big look on it. You got bullying in this movie. And that's not a rarity of things, but that's in some movies out there, some horror movies where you see kids getting bullied and then something tragic happens or something horrific happens and all. In this one, they take it and they turn it into a dark path of revenge where they're like, okay, we're going to get revenge on the people that have been beating us up, that have been bullying us. So that's a unique turn on that, where it's like, not only do you have such a horrific thing happening, you got, oh my God, there's a vampire living in my backyard, but you also got other people's lives that are affecting yours negatively, and then you're like, do I want to keep them safe? It's like you got one side that's like, nah, I don't want to let them know because I don't want anything bad to happen to them. Yeah, they gave me a black eye last month, but I still don't want anything to happen to them. But then you got the other friend that's like, no, I want them fucking dead. Let's use this as a tool. Let's use it to our advantage to take care of that, and then we'll worry about it later. But then, something else happens to where it goes a little bit darker than that. Writing for Observer, Rex Reed said that there is nothing to make your hair stand on end in the shed because it's not convincing. Flickering Myth, Matt Donato said, Sabatella serves the subgenre fine, but it draws out the same overused actions. And it does. It really does. It really shows. Like I said, when you're watching this movie, you're watching a vampire movie. That's all it is. Like, look at 30 Days a Night with Josh Hartnett. It takes place in Alaska. 30 days of night. It's like, how their time sequences up there. You got, 30 days of daylight, 30 days of night, and it happens every so often. It depends on the shift of the world, shift of the world's axis, the globe's axis, where it's like 6 months of day and 6 months of night, that kind of thing, So yeah, you got 30 nights or 30 days of night, and you can't see shit out there. Everything's at nighttime, there's no daylight. So what a perfect place for vampires to roam, especially when it's cold as shit in Alaska. That's a unique film right there. That's a unique film. You got a place that's cold as shit. Resources are kind of low. It's a small hick town. Maybe one sheriff, one deputy with a bullet in his pocket and a gun on his hip. That kind of thing. And it's overran by vampires, where the only weapon to use against them, which is sunlight, you don't have because it is continuously dark in Alaska. So then you gotta find other means of trying to kill them off. That is a unique horror action vampire movie right there, 30 Days a Night. And then, of course, we already talked about The Lost Boys, which is a timeless classic. It's a timeless horror film with some comedic elements in there from Corey Feldman and Corey Haim along with it. Some pretty terrific acting in there. That's a really good film right there. And then you got movies that have come out like Interview with a Vampire and such, movies in the 90s and all. The vampire genre doesn't get enough love, I don't think, as much as other creature features do or any other horror movies do. But in this case of a vampire genre, like something as new as The Shed, it tries to reinvent itself, but it's like this person once said, I was reading from The Observer, he said the movie is not convincing. And I will say that too. The movie's not convincing enough. It's not. There is nothing to make the viewer terrified of this vampire flick. Your hair, the neck on your, the hairs on your neck are not going to stand up. You're not going to sit there on the edge of your seat. You're going to sit there and watch a vampire movie. That's all it is. It's a little vampire movie. It's a popcorn flick to watch with your family or whatever. That's all The Shed is. It has really nothing new to add to the table. Maybe the story is a little bit fresh in a sense, but other than that, The Shed, to me, it's kind of a letdown. It was a little bit entertaining if you enjoy these kind of movies, but I feel like for me, being led into it by a certain selective scene from the movie posted on social media that got me into it, I gotta say, there's nothing to really offer here. There's nothing new to offer. So for me, I give the rating for The Shed a 4 out of 10 myself. I give it a 4 out of 10. Now, if it's something that you may be interested in, everybody, check it out. If you can find it on a streaming platform somewhere, give it a once over. If you like it, let me know down in the comments section if you guys enjoyed seeing this film. but I will say it wasn't really for me. You know, like I do like a good vampire movie. I really do. And I want it to be able to terrify me in a sense that there have been some movies that have in the past, you know, that actually give that effective feel to it. But this one, it really didn't. This is just a sit down once, watch it, tongue in cheek, and then on to the next thing. That's all this is. So that ends today's episode of Cinemacast, guys. Thank you for making it through with me for today's episode. Today's feature was The Shed. What did you think about this review today? What did you think about the movie? Let me know down in the comments section below. Also, if you guys are watching this, depending on which platform it is, YouTube, Twitch, or TikTok, leave a follow, leave a like, subscribe. Also, check us out on our social media. And if you're on Discord, follow us on Discord for other updates and much more. Thank you guys once again for joining me today's episode of Cinemacast. Today's feature was The Shed. And until next time, guys, we will catch you right back here at the cinema.